I stand here today to stand with our Coast Guard men and women as they face hostile action by intruders right in our very own seas. I stand here today in support of our troops of the BRP Sierra Madre who have endured years of blockade by interlopers who mistakenly think that by denying our boys food, they will also bring down their morale. I stand here today in solidarity with our fishermen who have been blocked from the rich waters which are legally and historically ours by a swarm of gunboats dispatched from the Great Wall of Sand. I stand here today to articulate the hurt and hopes of a people whose rights have been trampled by a bully who refuses to stand down. We have been cautioned, my dear colleagues, not to meddle on matters which by some theory is the realm of the executive. We are often reminded that politics stops at the water's edge, meaning discussions on politics should remain within our borders. We respect that, Mr. President. We respect that foreign affairs is a business solely pursued by the President. But how can we not speak up when the very troops who secure our borders and stand on harm's way have been airing their disgust? How can we remain mute when one nation after another has been voicing out their full-throated condemnation of yet another provocation against our Coast Guard peacefully, let me repeat, peacefully navigating on our seas? How can we, Mr. President, not echo the anger of a people against heinous acts on the high seas, committed with impunity by a party squatting on territory that is ours if we want to be true to our mandate? Kung tikom ang bibig at bahag ng ating buntot, paano tayo magiging Senado ng taong bayan kung ayaw natin bigyang boses ang kanilang hinagpis? My dear colleagues, last week, provocative, illegal, and dangerous maneuvers by the Chinese Coast Guard vessel on a Philippine Coast Guard supply boat is the latest manifestation of its might versus right treatment of peaceful neighbors. It is a show of diplomatic duplicity, of professing friendship, but practicing hostile behavior, Mr. President. Bubulahin tayo nila na kaibigan daw sila natin. Tapos sa isang iglap, bubombahin ng tubig ang ating mga barko. How can they convince us that they're sincere one day, and the next day, one day, and they shower a former president of ours with praises and assurances in Beijing, and shortly after, the next day, fire water cannons on our ships? At ang ganyang pagtrato, hindi lang ginagawa nila sa mga barko ng Republika ng Pilipinas, pero ang masakit, ginawa din ito sa mga baroto o bangka ng mangingisdang Pilipino. This incident, my dear colleagues, Mr. President, reaffirms the merit of the resolution that the Senate has unanimously passed last week. That resolution illuminates the way forward. Because China contemptuously ignored protest, all the more that we have to rally the world to condemn acts which have no place in a civilized order. This is a defining moment for this Senate. Today, we join the nation in standing its ground from the front, in need be, and longer from the rear. And I want to show you, I want to go back to the picture that was shown on Philippines, again on Ayungin Shoal and Pag-asa. Mas malayo po ang Pag-asa Island kaysa Ayungin Shoal. Napakaklaro ng Ayungin Shoal ay nasa loob ng ating exclusive economic zone. Bakit nagsasabi ang China na kanila po ang lugar na ito na napakalayo ng China, 600 nautical miles away from Hainan province? No rhyme, no reason, no logical explanation can say that is theirs kasi kakalabas lang po nila sa CNN at sinabi nila yan daw ay indisputable sovereign territory ng China. How can that possibly be? They're the only country that acknowledges that, Mr. President. No other country in the world acknowledges that they own that portion of the South China Sea, West Philippine Sea. China is a titan. That is a given, Mr. President. Their military expenditure alone is 70 times that of ours. We are even more dwarfed in terms of ships built. We are outmanned and outgunned. And the peace we seek will not grow from the barrel of our guns. But what we lack in force, we have law, and in goodwill. Sa puso ng ating mga kababayan. Diba? Kung sa basketball pa, sa FIBA, sabi natin, kaya ba natin talunin yung mga malalaking mga basketball teams? Ang sabi namin, lalabanan natin sila gamit ang ating puso. The international system remains one of law, Mr. President. And in this, we have the advantage. Might does not make right, Mr. President. Neither does it make fiction a reality. The Hague Tribunal is fully in our favor. So is the rest of the world. They cannot turn away, for they have skin in the game. 1/3 of global shipping passes through the South China Sea or West Philippine Sea. The world will not allow that it be turned into a Chinese koi pond. If China is left undeterred, they can and will put a chokehold on global trade. We welcome the influence of all nations who can help secure our seas. Despite all this, we have retained friendly relations with China amidst this dispute. Even in the midst of contention, we deliberate with them. Disagreements should not foreclose engagements. Pero yun nga sinabi ko nung isang araw, Mr. President, sa China. Bakit napakahirap kang kaibiganin at napakahirap mong mahalin? Diba? Kung gusto mo makipagkaibigan sa ating bansa, ba't napakahirap gawin po ito dahil sa mga ginagawa po ninyong mga atraso sa atin. We have filed protests and note verbals, and again today, another note verbal was sent to Beijing. In the hundreds, Mr. President, too many to count, but enough, I think, to gift wrap its embassy here with the paper it was written on. Ganun kadaming note verbal yun. Although they have repaid our hospitality with hostility, harassment, and hosing down of our ships, we do not give up on the hope that it is weaned of its bullying ways one day, and that with the world's help and influence to finally recognize our sovereignty in our very own waters. By simply following the rules, my dear colleagues, particularly of the UNCLOS, or United Nations Convention on the Laws of the Sea, as expected of a member of nations and a signatory to this, China can make the West Philippine Sea a zone of peace, a place of progress, and an example of coexistence. These recent events should define this Senate, and we must join the nation in standing its ground by being at the forefront of discussion and no longer the sidelines or from the rear. Although none of us here champion hostility, nor endorse the very tactics that we condemn, but all of us here are tired of the status quo. Paulit-ulit na lang po itong nangyayari sa ating Coast Guard at sa ating mga mangingisda. On the search, my dear colleagues, for a better strategy, I urge the executive to run the point, using all the viable tools at its disposal, such as a possible joint patrol over the West Philippine Sea with our allies, and the ones we have enumerated in our adopted resolution. Sa ating magigiting na Coast Guard at mga sundalo, maraming salamat sa inyong katatagan at katapangan. Katulad ng ating taos-pusong kinakanta sa ating pambansang awit, sa manlulubig, di ka pasisiil. Babalikan ko po yan. Sa manlulubig, di ka pasisiil. Saludo kami lahat sa inyong serbisyo at sakripisyo at hindi namin kayong papabayaan lumaban na mag-isa. Kasama nyo kami sa pagtindig laban sa mga pilit na nanghihimasok sa ating bansa. At kasama nyo kami sa pagtindig para sa tunay na malayang Pilipino. Sa lahat po nagdedepensa sa atin sa West Philippine Sea, saludo po ako sa inyo. Snappy salute, ladies and gentlemen. Once again, mabuhay kayo at mabuhay ang ating Pilipinas, mahal na Pilipinas.
Nakikita po natin sa larawang ito, and I hope this can be frozen for a while. Nasa harapan po yung maliit na barko ng Pilipinas na magsusupply ng provisions para sa Ayungin Shoal. Nasa kaliwa po, Mr. President, yung Chinese militia vessel. Nasa likuran naman po, yung Chinese Coast Guard vessel. Mr. President, to make this clearer, Mr. President, ang atin pong maliliit na barko, kagaya po nung nasa harap, ay 20-footer. Ang pangalan po niyang barkong yan, Uniza May 1 at Uniza May 2. Si Uniza May 1 nakalusot, nakapagdala po ng pagkain, ng provisions, gamot, medicines at tubig. Nakapagdala po sila sa loob. Si Uniza May 2, ito po nakikita natin, yan po yung hinarang. Hinarang po yan, Mr. President, hindi lang po nung nakikita nating white Chinese Coast Guard vessel na ang haba po niyan, Mr. President, ay 138 meters. Yung atin, 20 meters. Hindi lamang po yan dalawang yan, Mr. President, ang humarang. There were 5 Chinese Coast Guard vessels. And, Mr. President, there were 12 Chinese militia vessels. And these Chinese militia vessels moved to constrict the passage of both Uniza May 1 and Uniza May 2. Nakalusot lamang po si Uniza May 1. Yung pinakita po ni Senate President kanina na nabasa, ayun po si Uniza May 2. So Uniza May 2 po ay halos 2 oras pinaligiran. Hindi lamang po, Mr. President, ng 5 Chinese Coast Guard, 12 Chinese militia vessels. Meron pa ho, Mr. President, and I'd like to show a photo na na-involved. Ito po yung pinakita ni Senate President kanina, yung Chinese militia, Chinese Coast Guard 5201, and kasama pa rin dyan ang CCG 5304. Meron pa hong 5 umaali-aligid na Chinese Navy, Mr. President. And the Chinese Navy, these are the 5 People's Liberation Army Navy warships, are composed of 2 Type 056A guided missile corvettes, Vessel 629 and 623, and then a Type 053H3 light frigate, and then Type 052D destroyer, Mr. President. Destroyer na po yung humahabol doon sa 2 maliliit na barko nating 20-footer at Mr. President. As I have said, Mr. President, this is very alarming because of the presence of 5 People's Liberation Army Navy warship, and the Chinese militia maritime blocked the passage of Uniza May 2 vessel. Bumalik na po sila kasi basang-basa na po yung mga provisions. Basa na po yung mga bigas, basa na rin po yung mga radio equipment. Kaya bumalik na po sila after almost 2 hours of being encircled, Mr. President. The can we show the other picture? The harassment was so aggressive that only one resupply ship, as I've said, Unizame 1 was successful in reaching BRP Sierra Madre, reducing the available food, water, and medicine of the crew in the following weeks. As I've said, Mr. President, the other supply vessel, UM2, was doused with water cannons and the unsafe maneuvers of the Chinese maritime militia for almost 2 hours while repeatedly attempting to enter Ayungin Shoal but had to turn back. The Chinese Coast Guard 5305 also conducted an unsafe maneuver against the Philippine Coast Guard, causing a near collision with BRP Malabrigo at a distance of less than 5 meters. Dalawa po yung barko natin doon, Mr. President. BRP Malabrigo and BRP Cabra. Ito po ay 44 meters lamang, Mr. President, as against their 138 meters. Napakaliit lang po nung dalawang barko ng ating Coast Guard. Mr. President, joining the Senate President, ladies and gentlemen, that August 5 water cannon incident cannot be allowed to be set aside and forgotten like all other unprovoked acts of aggression by the Chinese forces in the West Philippine Sea in the past years. It is high time between the legislature, along with the frontliners in the West Philippine Sea, support actions diplomatically, economically, and perhaps the other action in concert with our allies to enhance the capabilities of our forces, acting in accordance with international law, while also condemning the dangerous and illegal actions of Chinese forces within Philippine waters. As I speak, Mr. President, as we convene today, hindi ho natin alam kung ano pa yung nangyayari. Baka meron pa hong nangyayari. Kaya ko lang po binanggit ito, and I support the Senate President, is that ngayon po, hindi lamang Chinese Coast Guard, but Chinese Navy ang kasali na ngayon. It is time to see an end to these blatant violations of international law and threats to Philippine sovereignty. Let us, as one country, support our uniformed services and fisherfolk as they lawfully ply and responsibly enjoy the bounties of the West Philippine Sea. Kanina po, Mr. President, and before I end, kanina po during the hearing conducted by Senator Jinggoy Estrada, yung Committee on National Defense, I raised the question, bakit po, Mr. President, sa ngayon, we have stopped accepting cadets coming from allied countries to enter into the Philippine Military Academy? Our cadets are now training in Annapolis, in the U.S. Naval Academy, in the U.S. Air Force Academy in West Point. But at the same time, while we condemn this, Mr. President, ang dami nating mga opisyales na nag-aaral pala sa Beijing Military Academy. Nandun po lahat sila. The chairman of the Senate Committee on Defense is now well apprised of this. And perhaps, Mr. President, it's about time that we show our support to our uniformed services by giving them a patriotic guidance and direction. Again, Mr. President, I support the privileged speech of Senator Mig Subiri, and I reiterate, as a country, let us be united, support our uniformed services, ang ating pong mga kasundaluhan, ang ating pong mga mangingisda na dapat po ay makinabang sa West Philippine Sea. Maraming salamat po, Mr. President.
Lahat po ng Newsflash video ay makikita sa aking Newsflash playlist. Sa mga gusto naman po ng mga biblical topics, punta po kayo sa aking channel na Mahaphir TV. Para sa mga gustong mag-order ng Firmax Firmang and Lifting Cream and Immune System Booster, contact Mr. Dante Maravillas on Facebook. Cell phone number 090865537757.